to AT&T ThreatTraq for March 4th, 2014. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. And today I'm joined by Jim Clausing, and I'm John Hogoboom. So the first story I think I was going to grab here, and it's there's a new Zeus variant. So we've talked about Zeus quite a bit in the past. It's a crimeware toolkit mostly used in banking fraud. And this article is not real new, but it's probably about a month or so old, maybe a couple of weeks. But it's an interesting little new trend. We've seen a lot of Zeus variants come out over time since the source code has been released into the wild. Maybe it's probably 2 years ago now, although I'm not really positive. But there was a version of the source code that was released into the public domain so people could kind of build their own and recompile it on themselves. Since that time, we've seen various new variants spin up. The Zeus Game Over variant came out, which was a peer-to-peer one. There's probably some other ones, like Citadel, I think, is another variant that's based on the same Zeus source code. In any event, long story short, there's another kind of new twist that came out here. And this most recent one is called the Zeus VM malware. And the thing that's notably different about this one is if you're familiar with Zeus, or at least the traditional Zeus binary, what it would do is it would go out and fetch a config file from a command and control, and that would have some information in about the types of websites that it's really interested in, various banking sites and whatnot. And for those specific sites, if it wanted to inject certain additional form parameters onto the screen, because it kind of works as a man in the browser type of piece of malware, so it injects new forms into the browser for you to populate, such as maybe it'll, when you go to your banking website, the real website does not present an input box for your social security number, but they can program the malware to say, well, when he goes to such and such banking company's website, it's going to add another form field asking for the social security number, and then they'll harvest that additional piece of information. And they don't necessarily need to do that, but they can add special things in if they want to extract more personal information out. Long story short, even though I'm making this longer than it needs to be, the real change in this piece of malware, this Zeus VM, is that the config file, they've embedded it inside of an image. So what happens is the malware goes and fetches an image from a website, which might be kind of disregarded by a lot of security analysts and whatnot, because they might not think that there's really instructions in there, and it really is a real image. And what they've done, and I guess one of the things I'm going to kind of beat them up a little bit, because they did a poor man's steganography here. So what they've done is they take the image, and at the very end of the image, they stick in some base64 encoded instructions. That's basically the config file, base64 encoded, and then they XOR and RC port as well. That's one way. So really, it's pretty obvious when you look at the image that at the very bottom of the image, there's some cruft, some garbage that shouldn't be there. It's not really displayable as part of the image. There are more impressive ways to bury data inside of an image, and there's been other discussions of that too, but they basically took an easy way out on this one. So that's the nutshell. It's the Zeus VM malware, and you probably should take a look at the article that we point you to here. Take a look at some of the analysis that was done. The Malwarebytes Unpacked website here did a pretty good analysis of looking at how it's actually added into the image and how you can actually find where some of these images are up on Zeus command and control servers by using Google's image browser. So you can use their image search feature to find potentially additional Zeus command and control points using some creative Google searching. Anyway, that's all I had on that one. I don't know if you had any other insights or if you had looked at this one yourself, Jim.
Yeah, no, it looked like an interesting new way of trying to hide the config passing there. We should also point out this article was brought to our attention by one of our viewers, so we do encourage you, if you have things you'd like us to talk about, send them in.
Yeah, that's a good point. We always encourage that, and case is the point here. This was a good one that we picked up on from the viewer there, and we decided to talk about. So thank you for that. So the next story that we had was one that you were looking into, Jim. Looks like Android devices are now getting involved in the Bitcoin mining or other types of currency mining.
Yeah, we've been talking about the Bitcoin stuff on and off here for the last few weeks, and so this one kind of got my attention. The article was from a German company that I actually wasn't all that familiar with until I saw a couple of their posts here in the last couple of weeks. But on the G-Data software blog, they talk about this new Android malware that they call Android Trojan.MuchSad.a. And basically what this malware does is it uses the cycles on your Android device to do the computation to do some mining of some digital currency. It wasn't Bitcoin, but it is another digital currency. And again, this malware is using the cycles on your phone in the background to do the calculations necessary to mine some of this stuff. And you may not actually ever notice it, except your phone could be warm, get hot from constantly doing these calculations. When you're not using it, the battery life may be a lot shorter. It came in a Trojanized copy of a radio app. The legitimate app is apparently relatively popular, been downloaded millions of times from Google Play. But the Trojan one, again, found on a third-party app store. Really, this one caught my attention because we occasionally hear of malware on Windows that's doing, this digital currency mining. This was the first time I had seen one on mobile devices. So thought it was worth bringing to everybody's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing that comes to mind for me is when it's on a phone, potentially here, which is probably most of the case with Android devices, the mining process for all of these digital currencies is very compute intensive. So, like you said, your phone's going to get hot. Your battery is probably your battery life is going to go into the toilet, I would imagine, because it's going to be so heavily processing when it's doing that. When it's doing the actual mining activity, I would imagine it's going to drain your battery a lot faster than normal.
That would be my guess, is that it's going to be horrible battery life. And that kind of makes me wonder why they would target the mobile devices, because the amount of computation it takes to mine one of these things, I'm not sure that you'd have all that much success with these devices with the batteries running down all the time.
Right. You would think that people might get are wise to it. And because it's very compute intensive, it's probably going to be a drain on the processor and maybe even shorten the lifespan of the processor, I would imagine. But, that's probably something that's, needs to be determined over time here. But interesting story. And I think this might be more of a proof of concept than something that we're going to see a lot of, but you never know. Probably will be seeing, because as more of these devices come out there, it's just more of an attractive resource for these guys to use for this type of activity or any of these malicious activities. So.
Right.
And then you had another story here about, we've seen a lot of stories recently about embedded devices having various vulnerabilities and issues, and it sounds like there's another one that has come to light recently. Yeah,
this one, it has been a bad few weeks for the home router type devices. This one comes to us in the form of a white paper put out by Team Cymru, or however you pronounce it. It's entitled "The Growing Exploitation of Small Office Routers Creating Serious Risks." Basically, what they're reporting on is an infection, exploitation, they say, of over 300,000 of these SOHO routers, the small office, home office type routers. And this is a completely different attack from the other ones that we've talked about recently, the Moon, the Linksys stuff we talked about a couple of weeks ago.
ASIS one, I think there is an ASIS one
there
as well.
There was an ASIS one, yeah. So this one is completely different. What they're doing is they're changing the DNS settings on the routers and pointing them to a couple of IPs. And what they seem to be doing then is using that to send malicious ads and so forth. They don't seem to be doing it to hijack, your banking transactions and that kind of stuff at the moment, although they clearly could since they own the DNS servers. And it looks like they're doing it via a number of different techniques. It's not just a single exploit that they're using to do all of this. They're using some cross-site request forgery, some embedded iframes and that kind of stuff. You embed this kind of stuff in web pages, and the guys on the inside trying to render the page will actually turn around and send a request to the inside interface of your router. So they're using some of those kinds of techniques to modify the settings on the routers. The things basically to look for, at the moment they seem to be setting the DNS servers to 2 addresses in the 5.45.75 address range. Check your router's DNS settings. If you see those addresses, you've probably been hit. For the last 14 months, there's been a lot of attention paid to these embedded devices, these home routers, small office, home office type routers, starting with the Karna botnet that we talked about quite a bit last year, up through the stuff that we've talked about the last few shows, including the Linksys, the Moon worm, and this one. Just the bad guys have been spending a lot of time attacking these kinds of devices.
Yeah, and there's one other one that that I was just going back through. I know the Belkin we talked about last week was another device that also reported not the same exact type of vulnerability, but a similar type of issue. So this DNS farming thing is not necessarily new, but maybe this is a new wave of it. And the thing that always concerns me about this type of thing is that these devices, your routers are really on your edge, your perimeter, your network. You probably don't log into them that much. You just trust that they're going to work and do what they're expected to do. And you may or may not, a lot of people set their home PC up or even their DNS when it gets sent to, their DHCP when it gets sent to them from the home router. It might have the router's IP address as the DNS server. So you don't really see the faked DNS, but inside the router itself, it has settings in there that says, basically it's proxying your DNS traffic. So it's a good thing to check. Make sure you keep your embedded devices, your routers and whatnot updated and check, frequently, and make sure they don't get tampered with. Also, this one is, we always talk about don't allow external people to administer it, so don't let it be allowed to be administered from the internet. But in this case, it's really kind of getting administered from the inside because, at least in one vector of the attack, they're hoping that you're going to browse to a web page, and then your browser is really the launch vehicle to attack your router from the inside. And so in that case, make sure you're not using the default password, because some people think, I have the external administrator port turned off. Nobody can get in here. I'm just going to use the default admin password on the thing, because who's going to be able to get in? I got WPA encryption. Nobody's going to break that. Well, the truth is, put a good password on there anyway. It's just going to prevent anybody from easily even if they can get some access to your network, from being able to get into the router and change the settings. So,
right. That's the big takeaway from this is, because as you said, it looks like, from the router's point of view, like it's being attacked from the inside, via this cross-site request forgery. Basically the bad guys are bouncing the attack off of some device on the inside back to the internal interface. So you can't just trust everybody on the inside. You need to take that additional step to protect the administrative access even from the inside.
Right, yeah. Thanks for that one, and I think that's our stories for today. So we're going to jump into the internet weather, and we're going to approach this one from a reverse order today. Normally we kind of show some slides about activity that's going on, and we end with the most probe ports. But I thought maybe in this case it might be better to kind of go in a reverse order because things will make sense as we go along the way here. So this was a little bit astonishing to me. I think you've noticed this at home as well, Jim, that the 5000 TCP port, it was creeping up last week. It was probably somewhere towards the bottom of the top 10 chart here, but it had never been in there before, really. Today, or at least for the past 3-4 days, maybe even a little bit longer, 4 or 5 days, it is dominating the most probe ports chart here in the pie chart. This is a lot. Now, normally we see like 445 TCP, because there's a lot of scanning on that. There's the latent configure stuff going on. In this case, that is way down in the pack here, and we're seeing this 5000 TCP and 23 TCP telnet, which we've also been talking about, has seen a tremendous growth in scanning volume. And we're going to take a little closer look at that. There may or may not be some correlation between these two activities. In terms of other things being scanned, 22 TCP, SSH, that's kind of always in the mix as well. But it's still up here, and it's a pretty much equal amount of share versus the 23 TCP. I don't know that it's the same actors involved, but they're definitely probably looking for same type of access, so to speak. 80 TCP is in there. You got your 445 TCP, which is your configure and other guys going against the Windows sharing vulnerability there, or the server message block stuff. 1433 TCP is your Microsoft SQL Server. 123 UDP, we've been talking about this a little bit. That is NTP. That's the Network Time Protocol. We've seen a big increase in NTP reflection attacks going on. They use them as a distributed denial of service attack where they spoof the source IP and whatnot. So a lot of this scanning is probably going on where actors are looking for additional devices they can use as reflection vectors for NTP amplification attacks. So that's probably what that one's about there. If you have NTP servers, actually that's a good thing, people should probably check to see if they have NTP running on devices that they don't expect it to be. You may not even know, but it's a good thing to audit your devices that are exposed to the internet side to make sure that they aren't. Because we see once these things get detected by these scanners, they get used in attacks. And what happens is your device and your network bandwidth is getting consumed because you're participating in an attack in proxy for these attackers, and you probably don't even know it. And maybe from your perspective, what you see is, wow, my internet is really slow today. I don't know why, but I can't get a freaking packet out. I can hardly bring a web page up, and it could be related to something like that. Not saying that it is, but if you have it open, you definitely want to close it unless it needs to be open for some specific reason. I'll get off my soapbox about that one now. The remote desktop protocol, 3389, we see that all the time. People looking to get in remote desktop wise. There's a couple of worms that use that port as well for RDP, Mordo being one of them. Some ICMP echo requests, and then way at the bottom of the pack, normally we see the 4 ports involved in the zero-access botnet, much higher up in the chart here. But some of these other activities really pushed it down below the top 10. So they're down in that, they're probably in the top 20. I'd have to go look. But they got really pushed down by some of these other protocols that have increased into the top chart here. So now I want to take a look at the 5000 TCP, because that is really dominating the scale of what's going on here. And we talked about this last time, and I think we showed something from like maybe the 11th where there was this big, it was way over here where you saw something like this, but now it is really taken off here. We're seeing, on the order of 500 million scan flows an hour. That's a lot compared to some of these other protocols. And the other interesting thing here is the shape of these. So there's kind of this sawtooth waveform going on here where all of a sudden they all engage in scanning at once, or there's a big, huge increase in scanning, and then it kind of decays, and it goes down, and then boom, it resurges again, even higher than before, and then it decays again, and then it resurges again and decays. Hopefully we're not going to keep going up in this upward direction. I don't know. I guess we'll see what happens next week when we do our report. But 5,000 TCP, as we talked about last week, and maybe even the week before, is associated with universal plug-and-play. I don't know. So I was doing a little investigation on this. I'm not quite sure if the goal behind this is to access universal plug-and-play or not. We're not really sure. But let's go to the next chart, and maybe we'll try to connect some of these dots along the way here. So here's the next one on 23 TCP, which is the number 2 most often being scanned in the past few days here. And I show a 60-day chart, which is a little bit longer because I wanted to show that this one has had more of a history here. So, we've always talked about 23 TCP gets scanned a lot because there's, provides interactive access to the device. So people are looking to get access to devices. But when you look way over here on the left-hand side, back in early to mid-January, even towards late January, the amounts of activity are not very high. You're seeing, I should also mention this is the number of unique scan sources involved as opposed to the number of scan flows. So when we see a big spike, let's just say this one right here, that means that there were 10,000 scan sources at the same time, pretty much, trying to scan for 23 TCP, which is a real good indicator that there's botnet association going on there. The other interesting thing I thought was that there's this similar sawtooth waveform here where it spikes up and goes down again, although that didn't really pan out quite as well. There might be a little bit of an indicator of that here, but not as clearly defined as the 5,000 TCP. So when I took a look at this, I was kind of curious, what the heck is going on? Why are there so many of these devices scanning on these 2 ports? I took a look at the scan sources involved. And so I had the IP addresses, and I just poked at them with a browser to see, do they respond with a web page or anything? And sure enough, most of them do. In fact, I would say 95% of them respond with some kind of page on port 80, and they're usually some type of administrative login page. So this one, the one in blue here, I'm not really sure what it is. There's a MikroTik router. I've seen a bunch of these. I've seen a bunch of these gray ones. I believe the blue one and the gray one here this is just a sample of, I just grabbed a few screenshots from a few of them to show what the login screens look like. But I believe that the blue and the gray are security camera DVR systems. A lot of those are OEMs from like 1 or 2 manufacturers in China. They have a similar hardware and code base, but they just have a slightly different web interface skinned on top of them to be branded for whoever's selling it. So it looks like a lot of them are these embedded devices, and the thing that I thought was interesting is both the telnet scanning and the 5,000 TCP scanning are the same types of devices in general. So then I started to wonder, well, that would lead me to believe that maybe it's the same population of devices scanning on both ports. And I did a quick analysis of that, and this is by no means a scientific analysis, but I grabbed a listing of all the scan source IPs over the past 48 hours that we've seen. The pink or the red one on the left is the one scanning on 23 TCP. There are about 79,000, almost 70 or 80,000 or so of these in the past 48 hours that we saw, unique source IPs. On the right-hand side, the blue one is the one scanning 5,000 TCP, and there are about 104,000 of those involved in that scanning activity. When I cross-reference these two together, only a very small amount, 12,000 of them, which is like between 12 and 15%, something like that, for either side here, are actually overlap. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that, other than there's a lot of activity that does not overlap between the two. And I did another analysis saying, well, let me discard and only keep the ones that are the most aggressive scanning, like the top 2,000 most aggressive scan sources, and the distribution actually ended up being the same. So I'll probably need to look at this a little bit more, I guess is what I'm saying. This was done this morning because I'm just trying to understand what is going on here. We know what these devices are. Maybe it's two different actor sets. The telnet stuff is kind of obvious why they're scanning for it, because a lot of these devices have that open as an administrative access method, and they might just be brute forcing trying to guess the password to get in. The 5000 TCP, I'm still kind of on the fence about. Not quite sure. If anybody, viewers actually have some insight into what that might be, I would be really interested in hearing some thoughts on that from anybody. We're probably going to look into this ourselves as well and maybe try to capture some packets related to this to see if we can kind of determine what is going on here and get a better insight into what that 5000 TCP stuff is, if it's universal plug-and-play or something else going on. The only reason I say maybe it's not universal plug-and-play is back when the Karna botnet was going on, we saw lots of scanning for a different port. I can't remember which one it was now, but it had nothing to do with whatever that associated port number was. And I'm not saying that this is Karna botnet. I'm just saying it's strange, and I don't understand it. I'd like to understand better why they're scanning for this port and if there's some vulnerability that they're exploiting there to get in, because it does make sense to me.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of these security camera DVR devices again. I'm wondering, are these the same ones that we saw that were infected and doing all the scanning a year ago with the Karna thing? And did they never get patched, or are these additional ones, new ones that have gotten exploited? I don't know if we've got the data to go back that far and look, but just...
I probably do have some data relative to that from previous analysis of the Karna stuff. The problem is, depending on what type of IP address it is, it might have changed. That was probably more than a year ago. It was actually probably a year and a half to 2 years ago that we were doing those analyses. And those IPs probably have recycled and changed over that period of time. But it's a good thought. There might still be some number of them that haven't changed because they're, somewhat of a fixed IP address. Okay, and I think that is our show for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. And as we said, if you have some insight or input into the show or even some suggestions for stories to cover, we'd definitely like to hear from you about that. The best way to get in touch with us is through email. You can just email us at ThreatTraq@list.att.com. And you can also find us on Twitter. Our handle on Twitter is @ThreatTraq. And the ThreatTraq video is available on att.com/ThreatTraq, as well as on the AT&T Tech channel and on YouTube. And as well, there's an audio-only version on iTunes, so you can listen to it while you're driving into the office. So thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Jim, for doing the show with me today. And we're going to be back next week with a new episode. Until then, keep your network safe.